Well, buyers, bullrush Aussie property, absolute chaos at auctions. Australians expect house prices to launch. Well, hi there, folks. It's Matt Hayson here with this week's The Word. We're a week on from the RBA's third rate cut this year. As everybody knows, it is now sitting at 3.6%. Confidence, it shot up and the headlines went bullish, and they went bullish fast. So let's unpack the hype, but let's also check it against the ledger. Now, the first headline, buyers bull rush on Aussie property, pointing to the preliminary clearance rate was sitting at 75%, and the data, the prices tend to rise double digits within 2 years of the first rate cut. Now, markets are still pricing in another 2 to 3 rate cuts by mid-2026. Also, absolute chaos at auctions. I love these headlines. Sydney ran about 720 auctions last week. That's a 30% week-on-week increase. There's also that story of a seller getting hundreds of thousands of dollars above reserve, but these articles are very much framed like this is happening at every auction around the country. Now, auctioneers, they're also reporting bigger crowds and more bidders are in attendance. Also, another headline, rate cut sends house price hopes berserk. This is pointing towards the Westpac consumer sentiment jumping 5.7% to 98.5. Also, home buyer sentiment surged 10.5%, and the story quote being that the long stretch of pessimism may finally be coming to an end. Also, Australians expect house prices to launch. House price expectations are at a cyclical high, according to AMP's Shane Oliver. National home values hit a new record in July. Also, auction clearance rate leaps to 75% as RBA cut boosts confidence. That was the headline in the AFR. Combined capital cities sitting at a preliminary clearance rate at 75%. Sydney was 75, Melbourne 75.5, and auction volumes are up, the strongest in 7 weeks. Now, some math in that article is that borrowing power is up $12,000 for singles, $24,000 for couples. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot when you have the backdrop of Sydney property prices. Also, rate cut triggers a new search for yield. Cotality shows national values are up 1.8% over the 3 months to July. That's the strongest growth since mid-2024. Now, listings are also down 19% versus the 5-year average, and markets see the cash rate heading towards 3% by the early 2026. Also, Christopher Joy's call is that 10% house price growth over the next 12 months. Now, when I read all of these articles on face value, it sounds like a roaring seller's market, but let's look at the ledger. The final auction reality, the final clearance rate in Sydney was sitting at 54.5%. Now, that's very different to the preliminary 75% clearance rate. 950 properties scheduled, 229 sold prior, 289 sold under the hammer, 124 were rescheduled, and 191 were pushed to private treaty. Now, that's 1 in 5 auctions leaving that theatre. Now, the energy may be up, but this remains a very balanced market, not a booming one. And the stamp duty burden. Sydney stamp duty on a median house is now equal to 120% of annual disposable income. That's up from just 45% in the year 2000. Stamp duty has grown 3 times faster than incomes, and also the affordability ceiling. The national home values are now 8 times your annual income in 2025. It's more like 12 times in Sydney, and they are projected to rise to 8.4 by 2026. Now, Tim Lawless, the head of Cotality, notes that rate cuts do help, but affordability is the wall. Now, living standards and productivity. As we know, productivity here in Australia is halved from 1.8 down to 0.9% a year. Now, workers could be $14,000 off by 2035 if this continues. Now, the RBA can't fix that problem. That's why we have this Canberra roundtable and tax talk underway. Government spending growth is near a 40-year high, and voters are saying no to any higher taxes. But think tanks are still floating wealth and inheritance taxes, scrapping capital gains discounts, and that would be bringing in up to $70 billion a year. Now, the ex-RBA governor, Philip Lowe, has put it plainly, politicians spend and the RBA plays the baddie. Now, none of this is screaming a boom. To surge from here, the property market is going to see buyers paying and borrowing at a ceiling price, paying record stamp duty while living standards are also falling. Now, that sounds like a pretty tough equation to me. So here's what we're seeing at the coalface. Well, we've seen 3 weeks of rain, being Sydney's heaviest rainfall in August in nearly 30 years, and it has delayed many campaigns, but we're already starting to see those forerunners of spring launch campaigns as the volumes are ticking up a little bit. The final clearance rate also nudged up a notch on the week prior, and buyers are active. They're also inspecting and they're also bidding, but they're not chasing the market. So here's what you need as a seller. You need to remain sharp around your strategy, price discipline, real pre-auction engagement, and also for many people, a private treaty plan B in some cases. Now, buyers, we will see more choice as listings increase, so there's going to be less pressure to overpay in the coming weeks, but There is very much selective heat and attention on well-priced properties, and that remains very evident. So yes, the headlines last week were loud, and yes, sentiment has lifted, but the ledger says this is an uptick in busyness, not so much an uptick in a breathless market. So that's why we're holding the CH Market Mood Meter this week at a 7 out of 10. That means confidence is higher, engagement is stronger, but tough ceilings do remain. So that's what's going down in and around the property market this week. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to catching you all next week.